My daughter tugged her left earlobe twice during Thanksgiving dinner, and my whole body went cold. She hadn't done that since she was 9 years old. It was 2019 and she was 29, sitting across from me at the dining room table with a man she'd been dating for 5 months, a man named Dominic, who was explaining to my wife how private mortgage investment corporations were the single most overlooked wealth-building vehicle available to everyday Canadians. I smiled and passed the cranberry sauce, but the part of my brain that had spent 24 years at the Canada Revenue Agency investigating financial crime was already running. The earlobe signal. We invented it at a family reunion in Arnprior when Tessa was in grade 4 and my great-aunt Mildred, a woman who believed that cheek pinching was an appropriate greeting for anyone under 40, had cornered her in the kitchen for the 3rd time that afternoon. Tessa had looked at me across the room with those wide brown eyes, and later that night, sitting on the back porch while everyone else watched Hockey Night in Canada, we made a deal. 2 tugs on the left earlobe meant, I need you to get me out of this, but I can't say it out loud. It had worked at Aunt Mildred's. It had worked at her piano recital when she was 12, and the instructor wanted her to perform an encore she hadn't practiced. It had worked at a neighbor's barbecue when she was 16, and a boy 3 years older was following her around the yard. We hadn't used it in over a decade. She used it tonight, right after Dominic finished his pitch about something called the Birchwood Capital Mortgage Trust. My name is Malcolm Carruthers. I'm 57. I live in a 3-bedroom house in Kanata, just west of Ottawa, with my wife Beverly, who everyone calls Bev, and a 13-year-old retriever named Angus, who no longer retrieves anything but still insists on supervising every meal from his spot under the kitchen table. I spent the first 24 years of my career at CRA headquarters in the investigations division, specializing in tax fraud, unreported offshore income, and what we internally referred to as creative structures, which was a polite way of describing the financial instruments people invented to hide money from the government. After I retired, I spent 3 years teaching a forensic accounting course at Carleton and another 2 consulting for a law firm on Bay Street that handled securities litigation. I have seen conservatively over 1,000 fraudulent financial documents in my professional life. I have testified in court 41 times. I can read a prospectus the way a mechanic reads an engine, and I can usually tell you within the first 2 pages whether something is built to function or built to look like it functions. Dominic was articulate, well-dressed, and roughly 32. He wore a navy blazer with no tie, which is the unofficial uniform of men who want to appear professional but approachable. He had good teeth and an easy laugh, and he remembered that Bev had mentioned wanting to visit the Amalfi Coast earlier in the conversation, and brought it up again naturally 20 minutes later, which is a small thing, but I noticed it because that kind of attentiveness is either genuine warmth or highly practiced technique, and in my line of work I had learned not to assume which one it was until I had more information. He'd met Tessa through a mutual friend at a charity gala in October. He told us this while helping Bev bring the turkey to the table, carrying the platter with both hands and making a joke about how his mother had once dropped an entire Thanksgiving bird on the kitchen floor and served it anyway. Everyone laughed. Tessa laughed the loudest. She looked happy. She looked the way people look when they want everyone else in the room to see that they're happy, which is slightly different from how people look when they simply are. Over dinner, the conversation drifted to finances the way it does when you reach a certain age and everyone at the table has a mortgage or a retirement plan or both. Dominic mentioned casually that he worked in private lending. He described himself as a portfolio strategist for alternative fixed income vehicles. Not a mortgage broker, not a financial advisor. A portfolio strategist for alternative fixed income vehicles. He said it the way people say titles they've tested in mirrors. He explained that most Canadians had their retirement savings locked up in mutual funds earning 3, maybe 4% annually, while private mortgage corporations were generating 9, 10, sometimes 12% returns backed by real Canadian real estate. Real bricks and mortar, he said, tapping the table gently for emphasis. Not some abstract stock market number. Your money is sitting behind a house in Barhaven or a condo in Gatineau. You can drive past your investment on your way to work. I asked him, pleasantly, what kind of regulatory framework these mortgage corporations operated under. He smiled. It was a good smile, patient and inclusive, the smile of someone who has answered this question many times and enjoys answering it because the answer is part of the pitch. He said they were regulated under provincial securities commissions, which was technically true for legitimate PMIs, but also the kind of half-truth that functions as a whole lie when delivered to someone who doesn't know enough to hear what's missing. He said the fund he worked with, Birchwood Capital Mortgage Trust, had been operating for 6 years with an impeccable track record and had never missed a quarterly distribution. 6 years, he repeated. Through COVID, through rate hikes, through everything, not a single missed payment. I nodded. I asked him where the fund was domiciled. He said the registered office was in Markham, Ontario, with servicing operations in Calgary and Vancouver. I said that sounded like quite an operation. He said it was, and that was part of the beauty of it. Scale meant stability. Bev was watching me. She has known me for 31 years. She can read the micro-expressions on my face the way I can read a balance sheet, and she knew something was happening behind my eyes that I was keeping off my surface. She stood up and asked Dominic if he'd like to see the new shelving I'd built in the garage, because apparently I needed someone to admire my dovetail joints. It was not subtle, but it worked. They left through the side door, and I could hear Bev asking him about his parents, while Angus followed them, tail wagging. Tessa waited until the door closed. Then she put both hands flat on the table and looked at me the way she used to look at me when she was a teenager and needed to say something she'd been carrying alone for too long. I know what you're thinking, she said. Tell me what I'm thinking. You're thinking he sounds like every pitch you used to tear apart at CRA. I'm thinking I'd like to hear what you're thinking, I said. That's why you use the signal. She exhaled. She'd been holding it in all through dinner. I could see that now. The bright smile, the loud laugh, the performance of ease. He's been talking to me about my TFSA and my RRSP for about 3 weeks now, she said. At first it was just general. Like, oh, you should really think about putting your money somewhere it can grow faster. And I thought, okay, that's just conversation. He works in finance. People in finance talk about finance. But then he started getting specific. He showed me a brochure, a real printed brochure, Dad, not some email attachment. Glossy paper, professional photos, charts with historical returns going back 6 years. He said his clients are averaging 10.4% annually after fees. He said there was a minimum buy-in of $15,000, but that he could get me a preferred allocation if I committed before the end of November, because they were closing the fund to new investors after that. I kept my voice steady. How much is in your RRSP? She met my eyes. $87,000. It's everything I've saved since I started working at the hospital. Tessa is a registered nurse at the Montfort Hospital. She has worked there since she was 23. She earns a good salary, not a spectacular one, and she is careful with money in the way that people who grew up watching their parents be careful with money tend to be. That $87,000 represented 6 years of discipline and sacrifice and bringing lunch from home and driving a 10-year-old Civic instead of financing something newer. And in my TFSA, I have about $31,000, she said. So $118,000 total. She nodded. He doesn't know what you did at CRA, I said. It wasn't a question. I told him you worked for the government. She paused. He said that was great, that he loved that you had a pension because it meant you understood the value of long-term financial planning. That told me something. A person running a legitimate investment operation would not care what a potential client's father did for a living. A person running a fraud would care very much, and the fact that he had asked about me and then folded my supposed government career into his pitch meant he was assessing the landscape around Tessa, mapping the people in her life who might notice what he was doing. He had already decided I was not a threat, retired government worker with a pension. Harmless. Has he asked you to sign anything? She pulled out her phone and showed me a PDF that had been emailed to her 2 days ago. It was titled Birchwood Capital Mortgage Trust, Investor Subscription Agreement. I asked her to forward it to me and she did it right there at the table. Tessa, I said, I'm not going to tell you what to do about your relationship. That's your life and I respect it. But I need to look at this document, and I need you to not mention to Dominic that you've shown it to me. Can you do that? She looked at me with those same brown eyes from the kitchen in Arnpro 20 years ago. Dad, why do you think I used the signal? After they left that night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and the subscription agreement and a pot of coffee. Bev sat with me for the first hour, reading over my shoulder, not saying much. She went to bed around midnight. I stayed up until 2. The document was 22 pages long, professionally formatted, clean design, a birch tree logo in muted green, a watermark on every page. The language was dense in exactly the right places, which is to say the places where a normal person's eyes would glaze over and skip ahead. The performance chart showed consistent returns of 9 to 11% annually for 6 consecutive years. The fund's stated strategy was first and second mortgage lending on residential and commercial properties across Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia. I read every line. Here is what I found. The fund's auditor was listed as Whitfield Sterling LLP. I searched for this firm. It did not exist. There was no accounting firm by that name registered with CPA Ontario, CPA Alberta, or CPA British Columbia. The name sounded real. It was designed to sound real. The registered office in Markham, when I pulled the address on Google Maps, was a Regus virtual office, a shared mailbox, not a real office with real people. The disclosure section referenced something called the Birchwood Capital Investor Protection Protocol, described in an appendix. The appendix was not included in the document. The returns chart cited no independent verification. No third-party auditor had signed off on any of the numbers. The chart was, in every functional sense, a picture someone had made in Excel. And the end of November deadline, the closing window, the last chance before the fund stopped accepting new capital. It is the oldest pressure mechanism in the fraud playbook, and it works because it converts a financial decision into an emotional one. You're no longer evaluating an investment. You're trying not to miss an opportunity. I knew 2 people I needed to call. The first was a woman named Janet Fong, who had spent 18 years with the RCMP's Integrated Market Enforcement Team in Toronto, investigating securities fraud, Ponzi schemes, and unlicensed investment operations. She had moved to the Ontario Securities Commission 3 years ago and was now a senior enforcement officer. We had worked opposite sides of several joint investigations when I was still at CRA, and while we didn't socialize, there was a mutual respect between us that meant she would take my call at 8 in the morning on a Saturday. The second was a man named Alistair Rowe, a securities lawyer in private practice in Ottawa who had spent 15 years at the Department of Justice prosecuting white-collar crime before going into defense work. Alistair could read a subscription agreement the way a cardiologist reads an ECG. He could identify the arrhythmias. I texted them both before I went to bed. Janet called me at 7:45 the next morning. She listened without interrupting while I walked her through the document. When I finished, she asked me to spell the fund name and the registered address. "Give me a couple of hours," she said. Alistair called at 9. I read him the investor protection clause over the phone, the one that referenced an appendix that didn't exist. He was quiet for a long time. "Malcolm," he said finally, "that clause is circular. It says the investor's capital is protected by the fund's asset base, and the fund's asset base is defined as the aggregate value of the mortgage portfolio, which is valued internally by the fund manager. There's no independent appraisal, no third-party custodian. The fund is essentially saying, your money is safe because we say it's safe, and we know it's safe because we're the ones holding it. It's a closed loop. There's nothing behind it." Janet called back at 11:15. I could hear the particular tone in her voice that told me this was not going to be a short conversation. The fund is not registered with the OSC, she said. It does not appear in the National Registration Database. There is no exemption filing. For a fund soliciting investors in Ontario without registration, that alone is a securities violation. She paused. The name Dominic Vaillancourt. He has no registration as a dealing representative, advising representative, or any other category under National Instrument 31103. He is not licensed to sell securities in any province. What else? I ran his name through our internal systems. He came up once, 3 years ago. A complaint was filed with the Alberta Securities Commission by a woman in Edmonton. She was 53, recently divorced, had met a man through a professional networking event who introduced her to a private mortgage fund. She invested $42,000. The fund was called Timberline Mortgage Partners. Different name, same structure. The money was transferred to an account at a credit union in Kelowna. Within 6 weeks, the account was emptied. The money moved through 2 intermediary accounts and then offshore. She recovered nothing. I closed my eyes. Was the man named in the complaint? The woman identified him by a different name, Brett Callahan. But the description, age, and the operational pattern are consistent. Janet's voice was flat in the way that experienced investigators' voices go flat when they are looking at something they have seen before and know exactly what it means. Same playbook. Target someone who is emotionally vulnerable, recently single, or has a new relationship. Build trust over weeks or months. Introduce the investment gradually. Create urgency with a deadline. Move the money fast. And the woman in Edmonton? Did she press charges? The file was closed. She didn't want to pursue it. Janet paused. She told the ASC she was ashamed. She said she felt stupid. That word, stupid. I had heard it in every fraud case I had ever worked. It was the word victims used most often, and it was always wrong. They weren't stupid. They were trusting. They were open. They were human, in ways that the person across the table from them was counting on. How much has he taken in total? I asked. That's what we don't know yet. The Edmonton case is one complaint. If he's been operating under multiple names and across provinces, there could be more. There were more. But that came later. I drove to Tessa's apartment that afternoon. She lived in a 1-bedroom on Elgin Street. Nothing fancy. A nurse's apartment with plants on the windowsill and a framed photo of our family from a trip to Cavendish Beach on the bookshelf. She met me at the door in sweatpants, no makeup, and I could see from the shadows under her eyes that she hadn't slept well. I sat on her couch and told her everything. The fake auditor, the virtual office, the circular investor protection clause. The woman in Edmonton who lost $42,000 and was too ashamed to pursue charges, the alternate name, the pattern. Tessa listened to all of it without moving. When I finished, she was quiet for a very long time. He told me I was the first person he'd ever felt this way about, she said. Not angry, not crying. Just flat, the way people go flat when they are processing the full weight of something they had trusted completely and it is collapsing around them. I know. He said he wanted me to meet his family at Christmas. I didn't say anything. There was nothing I could say that would make that land differently. She had to sit with it. The realization that the warmth was engineered, that the laughter was technique, that the way he remembered Bev wanted to visit the Amalfi Coast was not attentiveness but surveillance. She had to feel the full shape of it before she could decide what to do with it. After a while, she looked up. What do we do? I explained what Janet had proposed. In Ontario, you can record a conversation that you're a party to without telling the other person. It's legal. If Tessa could meet with Dominic and let him make his full investment pitch, let him name the fund, the amount, the deadline, the account details, the wire instructions, and record it on her own phone, that recording would be admissible. You want me to sit across from him and pretend everything is fine. I want you to let him talk, I said. Let him explain the fund. Let him tell you where to send the money. Don't argue. Don't confront. Don't give him any reason to think anything has changed. Can you do that? She looked at me steadily. There was something in her face that reminded me so much of Bev that it almost knocked me sideways. That same calm practicality that says, "This is hard and I'll do it anyway because it needs to be done." "Dad," she said, "I've held a dying patient's hand and told their family there was still hope when I knew there wasn't. I can have coffee with a liar for an hour." She texted him that evening, said she'd been reviewing the subscription agreement and had some questions before she was ready to commit. She suggested they meet at a cafe near her apartment on Wednesday afternoon. He responded within minutes. Warm, unhurried, encouraging. He said he was proud of her for taking this seriously. He used a heart emoji. Wednesday morning, I drove to Tessa's apartment. We sat at her kitchen table, which was small enough that our knees almost touched, and I walked her through exactly what to do. Phone in her jacket pocket, voice memo app running. Let him talk. If he pauses, let the silence sit. People fill silence, especially people who are selling something. Ask clarifying questions in a neutral tone. Don't be confrontational. Don't be overly eager. Be a woman who is almost ready to say yes, but wants to feel good about the decision. She nodded. Do all of it. How are you doing? I asked. She looked at her hands. Angry, she said. Not the yelling kind. The kind where everything gets very clear and very still. That's the right kind, I said. Stay there. I drove home and sat in the kitchen with Bev and Angus, and we didn't talk much. Bev made soup. Angus slept on my feet. I watched the clock. Tessa texted me at 3:22. It's done. I got everything. Calling you in 5. Her voice on the phone was controlled but thin. The way a voice sounds when the adrenaline is draining out and the shaking hasn't started yet. He laid it all out, she said. The fund structure? Returns of 10 to 12%. A minimum commitment of $20,000 with preferred status if I put in $60,000 or more. He said the November intake closes on the 28th. He gave me wire transfer instructions. An account at a credit union in Kelowna. Kelowna. The same city Janet had mentioned. The same credit union structure from the Edmonton case. Same pipeline. He said my money would be generating returns within 48 hours of the transfer, Tessa continued. He said the fund managers keep tight cycles because that's how they maintain the return rates, 48 hours. I knew what 48 hours meant. Once the money hit that account, it would move through layered transfers, through numbered companies and intermediary accounts, and within 2 days it would be functionally unrecoverable. The 48-hour return promise was not a feature of the fund. It was a description of how quickly the money would disappear. He also said something else, Tessa said, and her voice changed. He said that after the investment went through, he wanted to talk about moving in together. He said he saw a future with me. She paused. He timed it, Dad. He put the ask and the future in the same sentence. Invest with me and we'll build a life together. Yes, I said. That's how it works. I called Janet that evening. She asked Tessa to upload the audio file to a secure portal, which she did within the hour. Janet listened to it that night and called me back at 6:45 the next morning. Malcolm, she said. It's solid. He names the fund, the returns, the deadline, the transfer instructions, and the account number. He explicitly states that the fund is not available through traditional banks or mainstream advisors, which is a red flag statement that demonstrates intent to circumvent regulatory channels. We're moving on this today. I didn't ask for the operational details. That wasn't my role and it wasn't Tessa's. What I can tell you is that Dominic Vaincourt was arrested at a rented condo in Westboro on Thursday morning at 7:15. I know because Janet called me 10 minutes after it happened. She said it was clean. She said he had been calm, almost polite, the way people who've rehearsed for this possibility tend to be calm. He had a go bag packed near the front door. Passport, 2 phones, a laptop, $4,000 in cash, and a printed itinerary for a one-way flight to Lisbon departing Saturday morning, 2 days. If Tessa had transferred the money on Wednesday, he would have been on a plane by Saturday with her entire retirement savings processed through a credit union in Kelowna and on its way to wherever the rest of the money had gone. The investigation that unfolded over the following months revealed that Dominic Vanincourt, whose real name turned out to be Dominic Bordages, had operated under at least 3 identities across 4 provinces over 5 years. The Birchwood Capital Mortgage Trust was one of 4 fraudulent vehicles he had created, each with a different name, a different brochure, a different birch or timber or stone in the title, but the same structure underneath. A virtual office address, a non-existent auditor, a circular protection clause, a credit union account in British Columbia, and a window that was always about to close. The total confirmed losses across his victims, 11 people that investigators were able to identify, exceeded $1.4 million. One woman in Winnipeg, a retired school teacher, had lost $218,000, nearly everything she had. A man in Calgary, a widower, had lost $91,000. A couple in London, Ontario had lost $65,000 and were now facing the possibility that they could not afford to retire as they had planned. None of those people were stupid. Every single one of them was someone who had been open to connection, who had been charmed and warmed and gradually steered toward a decision that felt, in the moment, like a natural extension of a relationship they believed was real. Tessa was the first of his targets who didn't lose a dollar. The money trail was complex but not impenetrable. Janet's team, working with the RCMP and counterparts in Alberta and Manitoba, was able to trace a significant portion of the funds through the intermediary accounts. Some of the money had already gone offshore to accounts in Portugal and the UAE. Some was recovered. Not all. The retired teacher in Winnipeg recovered about 40 cents on the dollar. The widower in Calgary recovered less. 3 weeks after the arrest, Tessa came for Sunday dinner. Just the 3 of us and Angus, who had positioned himself under the table in his usual spot, nose resting on Tessa's foot, which is what he does when he senses that someone in the house needs something soft nearby. Bev made her roasted chicken with the lemon and herbs, the one she's been making since Tessa was in a high chair, and we sat at the same table where 5 months of carefully calibrated deception had almost reached its conclusion. Tessa was quieter than usual, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the anxious quiet of someone performing normalcy, the settled quiet of someone on the other side of something hard. She helped Bev clear the table the way she always did, carrying the dishes to the kitchen without being asked. And when Bev went upstairs to call her sister in Fredericton, Tessa came and sat across from me with her tea. "I keep thinking about what I missed," she said. "You didn't miss anything," I said. "You caught it." She shook her head. "I mean before the dinner, before I used the signal. There were moments when something felt off and I told myself I was being paranoid. Like when he asked me exactly how much was in my RRSP on our 3rd date. Who asks that on the 3rd date? And I told myself he was just financially literate. I made excuses for him. Tessa." I leaned forward. She had done it before. In Edmonton, under a different name. She was a 53-year-old woman who had just gone through a divorce and was rebuilding her life. And he found her, and he studied her, and he took $42,000 from her, and she was so ashamed she wouldn't even press charges. That woman probably also had moments where something felt off, and she talked herself out of it. The difference between you and her is not intelligence. It's not that you're smarter. It's that when your gut told you something was wrong, you didn't talk yourself all the way out of it. You reached out. You used the signal. Everything else, the recording, the investigation, the arrest, all of it, only happened because you tugged your earlobe twice at Thanksgiving dinner. She smiled at that, small and a little shaky. "I need to say something about that," I said. "About the signal. You came to me. You trusted me with something that was confusing and painful and embarrassing, and you did it in a room full of people without saying a word. I need you to know that whatever happens in your life, whatever situation you're in, however old you are, that signal is always live. You can always use it. I will always be paying attention." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and we sat like that for a while, listening to Bev laughing with her sister on the phone upstairs, and the November rain tapping against the kitchen window and Angus snoring gently under the table. There are things I want to say clearly. As someone who spent more than 2 decades working financial crime in this country, this kind of fraud persists because it is devastatingly effective. It does not work on foolish people. It works on good ones, on people who are open to love, to connection, to the possibility that someone who seems to care about them genuinely does. The most dangerous financial predators are not the ones who look suspicious. They are the ones who look like exactly what you are hoping to find. They are patient. They build real warmth before they introduce a single financial concept. By the time the investment conversation begins, you are already inside a relationship that feels authentic because, in many ways, it has been. The time spent together, the affection expressed, the way they remember that your mother wanted to visit the Amalfi Coast. The manipulation is woven so tightly into the genuine moments that you cannot separate them without tearing everything apart, and most people would rather not tear. The red flags are specific and learnable. Investment returns consistently above 8 or 9% annually should prompt hard questions. A fund that is not registered with your Provincial Securities Commission should be treated as suspect until proven otherwise. A business address that turns out to be a virtual office or mail forwarding service. A deadline that creates urgency. A reluctance to allow independent legal or financial review. An advisor who is not registered in the National Registration Database. None of these is a guarantee of fraud on its own, but each is an invitation to slow down, to step back, to ask someone you trust to look at what you're being shown. In Canada, you can verify any investment fund and any advisor through the Canadian Securities Administrators at securitiesadministrators.ca. You can check the National Registration Database in 3 minutes. It costs nothing. It requires no special knowledge. Those 3 minutes could be the difference between keeping your life savings and losing them. And this. If someone in your life reaches out to you, in whatever way they know how, with whatever signal they have, a hand squeeze, a phone call, a text at midnight, a look across a dinner table, please listen. Please take it seriously. Tessa used the signal we invented to escape her great-aunt's cheek pinching when she was 9 years old. She used it because some part of her knew, before she was ready to say it out loud, that she needed someone outside the situation to see what was happening. That instinct was worth more than every financial document in the case. Protect it in the people you love, and trust it in yourself. We didn't lose $1, but 11 other people did, and the difference for us in the end was a 29-year-old woman sitting at a Thanksgiving table, reaching up and tugging her left earlobe twice. If your gut is telling you something, please hear me when I say this. It is not nothing. It never is.